Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we are going to discuss a powerful and often overlooked intersection of topics: natural disasters, human rights, and the critical role national human rights institutions, NHRIs, play in safeguarding human rights during times of crisis. We'll explore the complex dynamics between these elements and how societies, governments, and institutions can address them. So, let's dive in. Natural disasters are events caused by natural forces, such as earthquakes, hurricanes, floods, and wildfires, that have devastating effects on human communities. When disaster strikes, it's not just about property damage. There is a profound impact on people's lives, health, and well-being. Now, the relationship between natural disasters and human rights might not seem obvious at first, but it's crucial to recognize that disasters often exacerbate existing vulnerabilities. For example, marginalized communities, like people living in poverty, indigenous populations, or those with disabilities, are disproportionately affected by the impacts of disasters. Access to basic needs such as food, water, shelter, and healthcare can be disrupted, and the rights to life, health, and security are often put at risk. Natural disasters can also lead to forced displacement, loss of livelihoods, and in the worst cases, loss of life. As a result, it's essential that governments, humanitarian organizations, and human rights defenders understand how disasters relate to human rights law. Before we dive into how human rights are impacted by disasters, let's quickly recap what human rights are. Human rights are the fundamental freedoms and protections that every person is entitled to, regardless of nationality, ethnicity, religion, or other status. These include civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights. They are recognized in international law, such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. When a natural disaster occurs, it can infringe upon these basic rights: the right to life, the right to access to food, clean water, shelter, healthcare, and education. These rights are often disrupted during and after a disaster. But it's important to note that under international law, governments have a duty to protect and fulfill these rights, even in times of crisis. Now, let's talk about national human rights institutions, or NHRIs. These are independent bodies that exist in most countries to promote and protect human rights at the national level. They play a crucial role in monitoring, advising, and holding governments accountable for human rights practices. But what happens when a natural disaster strikes? How do NHRIs respond to ensure that human rights are upheld? NHRIs are vital during natural disasters because they serve as a bridge between affected communities and the government. They advocate for vulnerable groups, monitor the human rights situation, and ensure that the government's response respects human rights principles. This means making sure that disaster relief efforts are fair, inclusive, and based on human dignity. So what exactly do NHRIs do in the aftermath of natural disasters? First, they often act as early responders. They provide emergency relief to vulnerable communities, ensuring they have access to life-saving resources like food, water, and medical supplies. NHRIs can also document human rights abuses that occur during disasters, such as forced evacuations, discrimination in relief distribution, or violations of the rights of displaced persons. Additionally, NHRIs play an essential role in advocating for the human rights of people who are displaced by disasters. They push governments to provide adequate housing and support for people who have lost everything. They monitor government response efforts to make sure they are carried out with transparency and accountability. Another important role that NHRIs play is in ensuring that recovery efforts are sustainable and that communities are not left behind. Recovery programs should not only focus on rebuilding physical infrastructure, but also on rebuilding the social fabric of the community. This means restoring access to education, healthcare, and economic opportunities, which are all fundamental human rights. Despite the important work that NHRIs do, they face significant challenges. Limited resources, political pressure, and the often chaotic nature of disaster responses can hinder their ability to operate effectively. In some cases, NHRIs may face resistance from governments or other stakeholders who are focused on short-term solutions rather than long-term human rights protection. Moreover, in some countries, national human rights institutions are either not well established or lack the necessary authority to ensure real accountability. In these situations, the voices of affected communities can be marginalized, and the human rights violations that take place may go unaddressed. Let's take a look at some real-world examples where national human rights institutions have played an essential role. After the devastating 2010 earthquake in Haiti, the country's NHRI, the National Commission on Human Rights and Freedoms, worked alongside international human rights organizations to provide emergency relief and advocate for the rights of displaced persons. They helped ensure that the most vulnerable communities received the aid they needed. Similarly, in the Philippines, after Typhoon Haiyan, the Commission on Human Rights of the Philippines was instrumental in ensuring that displaced persons were not subject to exploitation or mistreatment. The CHR advocated for the government to address the needs of vulnerable groups, including women, children, and indigenous populations. So, what can we do to ensure NHRIs are better prepared for natural disasters? First, it's essential that governments invest in the capacity and independence of NHRIs. These institutions need adequate resources, training and support to monitor and respond effectively to human rights challenges during crises. International cooperation is also key. NHRIs can benefit from partnerships with global organizations like the United Nations or regional human rights bodies, which can provide technical assistance and resources during disaster response and recovery. In conclusion, the intersection of natural disasters and human rights is a complex and vital issue. While NHRIs play a critical role in protecting human rights during crises, they face many challenges. It is crucial that we support these institutions, strengthen their capacity, and ensure that human rights remain at the forefront of disaster response and recovery efforts. Every disaster is an opportunity to rebuild in a way that respects human dignity and rights. Thank you for watching. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let's continue this important conversation in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe and remember, the protection of human rights is a shared responsibility.